I gave my life savings to my sister's cancer treatment. When she survived, she stole my husband and turned my children against me. At 63, homeless in a December blizzard with $8 in my pocket, I found a teenage boy collapsed in an alley. I used my last money to save his life. 72 hours later, 9 black Escalades stopped at the shelter where I was dying of pneumonia. My name is Margaret Patterson, and for 40 years, I built Patterson & Associates from a small accounting firm in my garage to a company with 83 employees across 3 states. My husband Robert worked alongside me, managing operations while I handled client relations and growth strategy. We weren't wealthy by Silicon Valley standards, but we were comfortable. Very comfortable. Our house in Evanston had 5 bedrooms. Our kids, Daniel and Sarah, went to Northwestern. We took vacations to Europe every summer. Then my sister Caroline called on a Tuesday in March. Stage 4 breast cancer. Metastasized to her bones and liver. The doctors gave her 6 months without experimental treatment. The treatment cost $370,000, not covered by insurance because it was still in clinical trials. Caroline was a freelance artist. No health insurance, no savings. She had always been the free spirit while I was the responsible one. She had lived her life painting and traveling while I built businesses and paid mortgages. She was also my baby sister. The girl I had walked to school every day when our mother worked double shifts. The teenager I had helped through her first heartbreak. The young woman whose college tuition I had paid when our parents couldn't afford it. I didn't hesitate. I liquidated our investment portfolio. I took out a second mortgage on our house. I pulled every favor I had with every banker I knew. Within 3 weeks, I had assembled $370,000. Caroline started treatment at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I visited her every single day for 8 months. Robert seemed supportive at first. He drove me to the hospital. He held my hand when the treatment made Caroline violently ill. But somewhere around month 5, something shifted. He started working late. He stopped asking about Caroline's progress. When I cried about the mounting bills, he would leave the room. Caroline survived. The treatment worked. By November, her scans were clean. The doctors called it a miracle. I called it worth every penny. My sister was alive. That was all that mattered. I threw a celebration dinner at our house on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Caroline looked healthier than she had in years, her hair growing back in soft curls. Daniel and Sarah flew home from their respective cities. Robert grilled steaks on our back patio despite the cold. For a few hours, everything felt perfect. My family was whole. My sister was alive. I had made the right choice. Robert asked to speak with me privately after dinner. We went upstairs to our bedroom. He sat on the edge of our bed, the one we had shared for 39 years, and told me he wanted a divorce. He was in love with Caroline. They had been seeing each other since June. She was moving into an apartment downtown, and he was moving with her. They had already hired lawyers. I thought he was joking. I actually laughed. Then I saw his face. Caroline came upstairs 10 minutes later. She wouldn't look at me. She said she never meant for it to happen. She said Robert understood her in ways I never could. She said they were soulmates. She said I would always be her sister. But some things were bigger than family. I asked her how she could do this. I asked her if $370,000 meant nothing. I asked her if 40 years of my marriage meant nothing. I asked her if I meant nothing. She said I was being selfish. She said I had always tried to control her life. She said the money was a gift, and gifts don't come with conditions. She said she and Robert deserved happiness. They left together that night. He packed 2 suitcases. She hugged Daniel and Sarah and whispered something to each of them. They both looked at me with something I had never seen before in my children's eyes. Disgust? Pity? I couldn't tell. The divorce was finalized in 90 days. Robert's lawyers were vicious. They painted me as a controlling spouse who had bankrupted our marriage to play hero with my sister. They argued that my unilateral decision to liquidate our assets constituted financial abuse. They had emails I had sent to Robert during Caroline's treatment. Emails where I had been desperate and emotional. Emails where I had written things like, "I need you to support me," and "This is killing me." They made me sound unstable. The judge awarded Robert 60% of our remaining assets. The house went to him because he could prove he had paid the original down payment 40 years ago with an inheritance from his father. I got my firm, but it was already struggling. During Caroline's treatment, I had been absent for months. 3 of our biggest clients had left. 2 of my senior partners had started their own competing firm. Revenue was down 40%. Daniel and Sarah stopped returning my calls. When I finally reached Daniel, he told me that Dad and Aunt Caroline had explained everything. He said I had always been obsessed with control. He said I had used Caroline's cancer as a way to make everyone dependent on me. He said I was toxic, and he needed space. Sarah sent a text message. "Mom, I love you, but I need to focus on my own mental health right now. Dad and Aunt Caroline need support as they build their new life together. Please respect my boundaries." I lost the firm in June. Without clients and with 2 partners gone, I couldn't make payroll. I couldn't cover our office lease. I had to let everyone go. 83 people, some of whom had worked for me for 20 years, received termination notices. I filed for bankruptcy in August. I moved into a studio apartment in Rogers Park, the cheapest neighborhood I could find. But even that was too expensive. My bankruptcy attorney had told me I needed to rebuild my credit, get a job, start over. But I was 63 years old. Every job application went unanswered. Every interview ended with, "We'll be in touch," and then silence. By October, I couldn't pay rent. My landlord was sympathetic for exactly 2 weeks, then filed for eviction. I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and a backpack. I spent the first night in my car. I spent the second night in my car. On the 3rd night, someone smashed my window and stole one of my suitcases. On the 4th night, the police towed my car because I had parked in the same spot for too long. I became homeless on October 18th. I had $43 in my checking account. I had no family who would speak to me. I had no friends who weren't Robert's friends first. I had built a life for 40 years, and it had evaporated in 10 months. November in Chicago is cruel. December is worse. By the first week of December, nighttime temperatures were dropping into the teens. I learned where the warming shelters were, but they filled up fast. On good nights, I got a mat on the floor of a church basement. On bad nights, I slept in the heated vestibule of a bank ATM or in the corner of a 24-hour McDonald's until someone kicked me out. I learned the rules of homelessness quickly. Don't make eye contact. Don't ask for money directly. Don't stay in one place too long. Don't trust anyone completely. Share food if you have extra because someone will share with you when you have nothing. Keep your backpack with you always. Sleep with your shoes on in case you need to run. There was a woman named Joyce at the shelter, maybe 70 years old, who had been on the streets for 6 years. She taught me which gas stations would let you use the bathroom. She taught me which grocery stores threw out good food at exactly 9 p.m. She taught me which cops were decent and which ones would hassle you just for existing. She told me her story one night. Widowed at 64, scammed out of her savings by a contractor who never finished work on her house, evicted, forgotten. She said the hardest part wasn't the cold or the hunger, it was the invisibility. People looked through you like you weren't human anymore. I understood exactly what she meant. By mid-December, I was down to $8.63. I hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. The shelter had been full 3 nights in a row. I had been sleeping in the vestibule of a Walgreens, but the manager had started locking it at midnight. It was December 14th, and the weather forecast called for a blizzard. Wind chill of -15, potentially life-threatening conditions for anyone without shelter. I tried the shelter at 5 p.m. The line was already around the block. By the time I reached the door, they were full. The volunteer, a kind-faced man in his 30s, looked genuinely sorry. He gave me 2 blankets and a list of other shelters across the city. But I knew they would all be full too. Everyone knew about the blizzard. I walked. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping to find somewhere warm. Maybe I was just trying to stay moving to avoid freezing. I walked south through Lincoln Park, past houses lit up with Christmas lights, and families visible through windows eating dinner together. I walked past the zoo, past the conservatory, past the coffee shops and restaurants where people my age sat in the warmth and complained about the weather. Around 8 p.m., the snow started. Not gentle snow, horizontal, stinging snow driven by wind that cut through all three of my jackets. I had $8.63. I could buy coffee and sit in a diner for a few hours. But then what? Coffee wouldn't save me when the diner closed. I found myself in an alley behind a Thai restaurant on Sheffield Avenue. The dumpsters smelled like coconut and lemongrass and spoiled vegetables. There were boxes, some of them dry, that I could use to block the wind. It wasn't good, but it might be enough. I arranged the boxes into a crude shelter and wrapped myself in the 2 blankets the volunteer had given me. The cold was beyond anything I had experienced. It didn't just make you uncomfortable. It made you hurt. It made your bones ache. It made your fingers go numb and then start burning. I tried to sleep, but sleep seemed impossible. I thought about Robert and Caroline. I wondered if they were warm tonight. I wondered if they ever thought about me. I wondered if Daniel and Sarah were spending Christmas with them this year. Probably. I thought about my firm. I thought about the people I had employed. I thought about the clients I had served. I thought about 40 years of work that had meant nothing in the end. I thought about dying. It seemed very possible tonight. People died from exposure all the time. They just fell asleep and didn't wake up. Would anyone even notice? Would anyone claim my body? Or would I become a Jane Doe, buried in a county cemetery, forgotten? Around 10 p.m., I heard something. A sound that didn't belong in the alley. Not a rat, not a cat, something bigger. I looked out from my box shelter and saw movement near the dumpster. A boy. Teenage. Maybe 15 or 16. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie, no coat. He was on his hands and knees, shaking violently. I thought he might be drunk or high. Then I heard him try to speak. His words were slurred. That's when I understood. Hypothermia. He was dying. Every instinct I had told me to stay in my shelter. I had $8. That was all that stood between me and death myself. This boy was not my responsibility. I didn't know him. I didn't know his story. For all I knew, he was dangerous. For all I knew, helping him would get me killed. But I saw his face. Young. Someone's son. Maybe someone's brother. Probably someone's whole world. I crawled out of my shelter and went to him. He was barely conscious. His skin was pale gray. His lips were blue. He tried to say something, but it came out as nonsense. I wrapped one of my blankets around him. It wasn't enough. He needed heat. He needed help. He needed a hospital. I pulled out my phone. 4% battery. I called 911. The operator answered. I explained where we were, what was happening. She told me an ambulance was on the way. She told me to keep him warm and conscious. She told me to stay on the line. My phone died before she finished the sentence. The boy's shaking was getting worse. His eyes were rolling back. I knew that was a bad sign. I had watched enough medical shows to know. I needed to get him warmer. The Thai restaurant was closed, locked, but there was a convenience store 2 blocks away. If I could get him there, they might help. I tried to lift him. He was too heavy. I was too weak. I had no food, no strength. I got him halfway to his feet before we both collapsed. He mumbled something. It sounded like Mom. He was crying. I made a decision. I left him in the alley, wrapped in my blanket. I ran to the convenience store. The clerk behind the counter was a young woman, maybe 25, scrolling through her phone. I burst through the door and tried to explain. There was a boy. He was dying. We needed help. She looked at me the way everyone looked at me now. Homeless, crazy, dangerous. She told me to leave or she would call the police. I told her to call the police. I told her to call anyone. There was a boy dying in the alley. She picked up the phone but kept her eyes on me like I might attack her. I ran back to the alley. The boy was worse. His shaking had almost stopped. That was more terrifying than the shaking. I remembered reading somewhere that when the shaking stops, you're in the final stage. I tried to talk to him. I asked him his name. I asked him where he lived. I asked him to stay awake. He didn't respond. I had $8.63. The convenience store sold hand warmers, 5 packs for $8. It wouldn't be enough, but it was something. I ran back to the store. The clerk was still on the phone with someone, probably the police. I grabbed 5 packs of hand warmers and threw $8 on the counter. She started to say something. I didn't wait. I ran. I tore open the hand warmers and shook them to activate the heat. I put them inside the boy's hoodie, against his chest and his sides. I put one in each of his hands. I wrapped us both in the remaining blanket and held him against me, trying to share whatever body heat I had left. I talked to him. I told him he was going to be okay. I told him help was coming. I told him to hang on. I told him about my kids. I told him about my sister. I told him about everything I had lost. I told him he couldn't die because someone loved him and someone was waiting for him and someone's life would end if he didn't make it. I heard sirens. They seemed far away at first, then closer. Red and blue lights lit up the alley. Paramedics appeared. They moved me aside gently. They worked on the boy with practiced efficiency. They asked me questions. What happened? How long had he been like this? Did I know him? I answered what I could. They loaded him onto a stretcher. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind eyes, asked if I needed medical attention too. I said no. She handed me a business card for a shelter and told me to get somewhere warm tonight. Then they were gone. I stood in the alley alone. I had 63 cents. No blankets. No hand warmers. The blizzard was getting worse. I walked back to my box shelter, but the wind had destroyed it. I tried to rebuild it, but my hands wouldn't work properly. Too cold. Too numb. I thought about the boy. I hoped he would survive. I hoped someone was waiting for him at the hospital. I hoped he had a mother who loved him. I thought about my own children. I wondered if they would come to my funeral if I died tonight. Probably not. I walked to the Walgreens vestibule, but it was locked. I walked to the McDonald's, but there was a new manager who told me to leave before he called the police. I walked to the bank ATM vestibule, but someone was already sleeping there, and he told me to find my own spot. I found a doorway of a closed office building. It blocked some of the wind. I sat down with my back against the door and pulled my hood up and my sleeves over my hands. I closed my eyes. I thought maybe if I could just make it to morning, the shelter would have space. I thought maybe I could make it until morning. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to someone shaking me. A police officer. He was asking me something. I couldn't hear him properly. Another officer appeared. They were saying something about hypothermia. One of them wrapped me in a silver blanket. They were trying to get me to stand up. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't work. An ambulance appeared. Different paramedics. They loaded me onto a stretcher. I tried to tell them I couldn't afford the hospital. They told me not to worry about that now. The inside of the ambulance was warm. So warm. I started shaking uncontrollably. One of the paramedics said that was a good sign. It meant my body was still fighting. I woke up in a hospital bed, Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where Caroline had been treated. The irony wasn't lost on me. A nurse came in and checked my vitals. She said I had severe hypothermia and early-stage pneumonia. They were keeping me for observation. Did I have any family they could call? I said no. They kept me for 3 days. During that time, I had a lot of visitors I didn't expect. Social workers, case managers, a patient advocate. They all asked questions and took notes. They told me about programs and resources. One of them mentioned that the boy I had helped was in the same hospital. He was going to be okay. He had asked about me. On the 4th day, a woman came to my room. She was in her 50s, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from money and education. She introduced herself as Victoria Chen. She said she needed to speak with me. She sat down in the chair beside my bed. She said her son, Marcus, was the boy I had found in the alley. He was 16 years old. He had been at a party in Lincoln Park. He had gotten into an argument with some kids from his school. He had stormed off into the blizzard without his coat. By the time he realized how far he had walked and how cold he was, He couldn't find his way back. His phone had died. He had collapsed in that alley behind the restaurant. The doctors had told her that if I hadn't found him when I did, he would have died. The hand warmers and the blanket and my body heat had kept him alive until the paramedics arrived. She started crying. She said I had given him a second chance at life. She said she could never repay that debt. I told her I hadn't done anything special. I told her any decent person would have done the same. She looked at me for a long moment. She said that wasn't true. She said most people would have walked past. She said the fact that I had been homeless, that I had been dying myself, that I had used my last $8 to save her son, made it even more extraordinary. She asked me to tell her my story. I didn't want to. I was ashamed, but something about her made me feel like she would understand. So I told her everything. Caroline, Robert, the divorce, my children, the firm, the bankruptcy, how I had ended up in that alley. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. She said her husband, David Chen, was the founder and CEO of Chen Industries, one of the largest commercial real estate development firms in the Midwest. She said they had been looking for someone to lead their new charitable foundation. The foundation's mission was to support women over 50 who had been economically displaced by divorce, illness, or family crisis. They wanted to provide grants, job training, housing assistance, and legal support. They needed someone who understood what these women faced. Someone who had lived it. She asked if I would be interested in the position. I thought she was joking. I told her I had no experience in nonprofit work. I told her I had filed for bankruptcy. I told her I was homeless. I told her no one would take me seriously. She said I was exactly who they needed. She said my accounting background meant I understood how to manage money and operations. She said my experience building a firm from scratch meant I understood entrepreneurship. She said my recent experience meant I understood the population they were trying to serve. She said they would provide a salary of $85,000 a year, health insurance, and a housing stipend to help me get back on my feet. I asked why. Why would she do this for me? She could hire anyone. Someone credentialed. Someone with a home address and clean clothes and references. She said because I had used my last $8 to save her son. She said that told her everything she needed to know about my character. She said the world needed more people like me in positions where they could make a difference. I started crying. I couldn't help it. I had spent 10 months being invisible. 10 months being told I was worthless. 10 months being treated like I was less than human. And this woman, this stranger, was telling me I mattered. She was telling me I had value. I accepted. Within a week, I moved into a small apartment in Lakeview. Within 2 weeks, I started my new position at the Chen Foundation. Within a month, I was interviewing grant applicants and designing programs and building partnerships with other organizations. I met women whose stories mirrored mine, women who had given everything to save their families and been abandoned, women who had been erased by divorce or illness or betrayal, women who just needed someone to see them as human again. Marcus came to visit me at the foundation office in February. He was healthy, thriving. He brought me flowers and a thank you card signed by his entire family. He said he wanted to volunteer at the foundation when he turned 18. He said what happened that night had changed his perspective on everything. He said he wanted to spend his life helping people the way I had helped him. I didn't hear from Daniel or Sarah for months. Then, in March, Sarah called. She had seen an article about the Chen Foundation in the Tribune. The article mentioned me by name. She said she had no idea where I had been. She said Dad and Aunt Caroline had told her I had moved to Arizona to be near some old friends. She said when she couldn't reach me, they said I wanted space. I told her the truth. All of it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she was sorry. She said she should have tried harder to reach me. She said she should have questioned their version of the story. She said she loved me and she wanted to rebuild our relationship if I was willing. I told her I loved her too. I told her I would always love her. But I also told her that trust takes time to rebuild. She understood. Daniel never called. I heard through Sarah that he and Robert had started a business together, some kind of consulting firm. Caroline was apparently very sick again. The cancer had returned. Robert was taking care of her. Sarah said it with a strange tone, like she was waiting for me to feel vindicated. I didn't. I just felt sad. Sad for all of us. Sad for what we could have been. I ran into Joyce, the woman from the shelter, in April. She was outside the public library. She recognized me immediately. She said she had heard about the Chen Foundation. She asked if they were accepting applications. I told her to come to our office the next day. We got her into transitional housing within 2 weeks and connected her with a job training program for seniors. She started working as a receptionist at a nonprofit that served homeless youth. She said for the first time in 6 years, she felt like herself again. That's what the foundation does. It doesn't just provide money or services. It provides identity. It reminds women that they are not their worst moment, that they are not defined by what was taken from them. I still think about that night in the alley sometimes. I think about how close I came to staying in my box shelter. How easy it would have been to ignore the boy. To tell myself I had nothing to give. To save myself first. But I think about what Victoria Chen said to me. That my choice to help Marcus, despite having nothing, told her everything she needed to know about my character. And I realized that was the point. When you have everything, generosity is easy. When you have nothing, generosity is who you are. I gave my life savings to save my sister. She stole my husband. My children abandoned me. I lost everything I had built in 40 years. I became homeless in a December blizzard, and in that alley, freezing to death with $8 in my pocket, I found out who I really was. I was someone who would use her last $8 to buy hand warmers for a dying boy. And that, it turned out, was worth more than anything I had lost.